What's up? It's your boy Kevin to turn on this motherfucking YouTube shit. Wow, what the fuck?
What's up? It's your boy. Can't tell you do shit. Hey man, we are lit. Man, turn. Today, motherfucking day. You're hearing outside big crib in the gang. You're hearing outside shit, man. Free Palestine, free Congo, Russia do your thing, and take stand the fuck up. Each day is a new day to be a better version of yourself. Never let somebody bring you down, always fight back. Never let somebody tell you you are, but also never put yourself in a position you don't belong. Stay humble, let's get on the revolution, on this movement. Keep Yahweh first. Come to the black Hebrew Israelite as a real Jew. Let's get to this bitch. Alright. Boom. Today, it's motherfucking day. Straight here outside. Big crib in the gang. Straight outside shit, man. Alright, gang. Say, hey, man. This is a good ass video. It's about a notorious black drug lord named Frank Matthews, man. You know what I'm saying? Who really built his legacy off of running the scheme. You know what I'm saying? From coming to nothing to having something and becoming one of the biggest people in America during that time and running a whole franchise. You know what I'm saying? And the thing I want to let y'all niggas know, man, before we get into this video, we know who's some of the biggest drug people in America, and that's the American government. You know what I'm saying? The American government controls so much weight. They control so much, like, moving that pressure. And then when you a black man trying to make up a piece of a pie, they gonna try to take you out because they thinking they can get that money on. You know what I'm saying? If y'all gonna see through this video that a lot of these people ran by the fake Jews through the mafia. The mafia was controlled basically by the fake Jews, and fake Jews are the government. You know what I'm saying? But y'all will see how this black man made his own way, came from nothing, and took over the thing and disappeared on these motherfuckers. Let's get into this bit. Shout out to Life of a Gangster. You know, man, the way that America KK got shit set up, man, the only way that you can ever really succeed in America is to commit crimes. I hate to say it. A lot of these people who are billionaires, white people, done stepped on niggas, done stepped on every black person. And when us black people find out a way to make some money out of something, we get something bad happen always. But these billionaires done stepped on everybody. They go over to different countries, step on them niggas' necks. Look what's happening in Congo and shit. Stepping on these niggas' necks and shit. And get the buku money on. But then when we try to do some shit around this bitch and try to make our impact in the world, we get stepped on. But these motherfuckers continue to do what they do.
How can you be the head of one of the biggest drug trafficking networks in history, run away with the equivalent of over $100 million in today's money, and disappear without a trace? I think only Frank Matthews holds that secret. Ranked by the DEA as one of the top 10 drug traffickers in U.S. history, Frank Matthews has had an incredible story, yet few people talk about it.
Frank Matthews.
Based in Brooklyn in the 60s and 70s, this young African-American gangster, in his 20s at the time, was indeed at the head of one of the greatest criminal empires this world has ever known. His fortune was estimated at $300 million,
Damn.
the equivalent of $2 billion today.
Serving that cake,
the
man.
colossal fortune acquired through the sale of heroin and cocaine throughout the eastern United States. A network that was totally independent of mafia control, which was extremely rare for an African-American gangster, and I'd like to say for an American gangster at all. By freeing himself from the mafia, Frank Matthews had done better than his predecessor, Bumpy Johnson, but also better in terms of fortune than Frank Lucas, the heroin dealer popularized by the film American Gangster. But then again, few people seem to know about this. No doubt Hollywood didn't want to popularize a criminal who had managed to beat the system. Because can you imagine a gangster movie with the thug running off with the money at the end?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what Frank Matthews did.
They want us all to die or become a slave or some shit.
In court. disappearing from the face of the earth just like that, with his girlfriend and over $100 million in his pocket.
The biggest drug sellers in the world is the American government. I stamp that.
In short, a mysterious gangster who
Us black people just trying to get a piece of the pie.
So,
The
get
fuck?
ready to dive into the most intriguing unsolved case of recent decades.
And he had been identified as one of the largest, if not the largest, heroin trafficker in the United States. He was in a league of his own, and he was a top, not only an organizer, but a businessman. There's been a lot of recent movies on Lucas being the king of drugs. That's not true. And Matthews was the number one heroin pioneer.
I'd say he was definitely smarter than Frank.
The DA agent.
Frank Lucas, yeah.
Where he is today, God only knows.
I think he's alive. And I say this unequivocally because he's a smart person.
All of the agents who work on the case to this day believe he's still alive.
Turn up, man. Frank Larry Matthews.
The life of Frank Matthews is, how can I put this, one hell of a mystery. But what's even more of a mystery is his youth, about which we really know very little. The reason? The many conflicting accounts from people who supposedly knew him. Ricky Johnson, a native of Durham, the North Carolina town from which Frank Matthews came, tells us,
"You hear so many stories about Frank Matthews. It's hard to distinguish what's what. They all have a different version of growing up with him. You realize a lot of what you hear is really just rumor."
Another Durham resident agrees.
"A lot of people like to make up stories so they can be in the limelight. They say they remember Frank sold drugs for him. Then you realize they are younger than Matthews and not from the same generation. They just want to be a part of the legend."
As for those who really knew him, well, they generally avoid talking about it. As this Durham native, who claims to have known Frank, puts it,
"You ain't gonna get people from here to open up about Frank. They're either thinking you with the law, or they fear they may say something that can come back and bite them. People here are cautious. Many think Frank Matthews is still alive. You never know who's listening."
I'm trying to figure out who Frank Matthews is. He's like a good dude.
So, it's not easy to get a clear picture of Frank's youth. But there are a few things we can learn about his early years. Frank Larry Matthews hails from Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
He was born there on February 13th, 1944,
NC.
into a family he hardly knew. We know nothing about his father. As for his mother, she died when he was barely 4 years old.
Damn.
From then on, young Matthews was raised by his aunt, who took him in and raised him as her own son. He lived in the poorest district of Durham, a city renowned at the time for being home to one of the most prosperous black communities in the country, despite the segregation in force. A Durham native and friend of Matthews recalls,
"The Rand and segregation days had everything a black person could want. We had a lot of black wealth. Per capita, we had more black millionaires than any city in North Carolina. The atmosphere of this period gave young blacks the incentive to try to achieve more."
which I'm sure Frank was, inspired without a doubt by all the successful black entrepreneurs in Durham. Al Bradley, an author who has written extensively on Frank's life, will say,
"Matthews must have seen lots of black-owned businesses and successful black men when he was growing up. That later gave him the chutzpah to circumvent the Italian mafia in the drug business. That was unheard of at the time. Something in Matthews growing up gave him the confidence to stride fearlessly into a world that didn't respect him."
Frank made his mark from an early age, especially with his classmates and the boys in his neighborhood. He seems to be a born leader, whom children of his age want to follow. People who knew him as a child used the same two words to describe him: strong and charismatic. Qualities that would later enable Frank to compete with New York's most ruthless gangsters. At school, however, the picture is not the same. Frank lacks seriousness and seems disinterested in his schooling. What he prefers is to be on the streets.
Cause schoolwork just makes you into a slave, man.
Like a fish in water. No wonder he dropped out of school at an early age. All he wanted to do was make money, as one of his childhood friends recalls.
Even in those days, he was all about money. Frank was a hustler.
Frank Matthews could also be generous to his loved ones. On the other hand, you didn't want to mess with him because he could also turn violent, as another of his comrades points out.
Frank was a natural who would fight anybody over anything.
He could, however, be aloof and reserved, as this other friend reveals.
People bragged that they knew Frank, but they didn't really know him. You can never really get close to Frank.
As a teenager, he became the leader of a gang in which he was involved in several petty crimes, including the theft of chickens from a local farm, which led to his arrest at the age of 14. He later joined a hairdressing school, but only stayed there a few months. According to a Durham native, this was because Frank had been caught stealing barber's equipment.
Damn.
But the latter also adds,
"Not too long after that, I saw Matthews on Fayetteville Street. He said he was going to New York to make money."
Frank left his hometown of Durham in the early 60s to seek his fortune. Still in his teens, he set off to pursue his dreams of fortune by heading northeast, initially for Philadelphia. He stayed there for about a year. During this time, he worked as a barber and number collector for a numbers game racket. Through this illegal activity, which was widespread at the time, Frank met other ambitious young people who, like him, were looking to make money. But, as mentioned, Frank didn't stay long in Philadelphia, and in 1963, or perhaps 1964, he left for New York. A logical choice for Roger Garay, a police detective who had investigated
NC Philadelphia, New York.
New York is a city of opportunity for an ambitious gangster, as well as for those who want to make an honest living.
Frank moved to Brooklyn and continued to do what he had been doing in Philadelphia, working as a hairdresser while organizing illegal gambling. He continued this activity for some time before tiring of the numbers game racket and turning to a more profitable business: drug dealing.
The cocaine.
Frank was quick to see that the black drug dealers in his neighborhood were lining their pockets,
Facts.
though it didn't take long for him to decide to follow, as Inspector Roger Garay points out.
I think Frank woke up one morning and decided to hang up the barber's white jacket. Frank said to himself, "I'm going to be the dude who wears the $300 silk suits and drives the Lincoln."
In the 60s and 70s, an illicit substance spread massively in New York: heroin. At the time, the drug was creating a veritable epidemic, fueling violence and disorder in the black community, a chaos that one of the city's former police officers remembers.
Still don't work today.
Frank took advantage of the situation, and in order to get involved in the flourishing drug trade, he had no choice but to make contact with a criminal organization that controlled the supply and distribution of heroin throughout New York, the Great Cosa Nostra.
Bridget, you are a brilliant woman.
In the 1960s, the drug trade on the U.S. East Coast, and particularly in black communities, was controlled by New York's 5 major mafia families: the Gambinos, the Lucchese's, the Bonanos, the Genoveses, formerly Luciano, and the Colombos, formerly Profaci. For a time, the trade was dominated by Jewish gangsters, notably Arnold Rothstein, an organized crime figure.
Told y'all the fake Jews always got their hand in some shit.
Grasped the lucrative potential of this illegal trade, helping to organize and expand
the government.
Sam's country. Then, in the 1930s, the the Italian mafia, seeking to diversify after Prohibition, joined the Jewish underworld in drug trafficking.
I tell y'all, them Jewish people are the government.
In the following decade. After the Second World War, heroin, which the mafia trafficked, was imported from Italian refineries. These refineries closed after the Italian government decided to ban heroin manufacture in the early 50s. Left with no choice, the mafia looked for other sources of supply. And it was here that the French Connection was born, with the establishment of an even more sophisticated smuggling network in which opium was cultivated in Turkey, then sent to France for processing in clandestine laboratories, and finally distributed throughout the United States. This network, which thrived in the 50s and 60s, enabled the American mafia to continue trafficking drugs in the United States and New York. To penetrate this market and start selling his first kilos of heroin, Frank Matthews had to go through the Cosa Nostra. He did this by trying to form a partnership with the Gambino and Bonanno families, but for one reason or another, they turned him down. Many would have been discouraged by
Probably
this
'cause he's
refusal,
black.
but not Frank. He was young, ambitious, and determined to make his mark in the dope business. So he persevered until he found another opportunity. An opportunity that came from Spanish Raymond Marquez, an acquaintance of Frank's known at the time as the king of the underground lottery in Harlem. He had connections, which he passed on to Frank, putting him in touch with a Cuban gangster by the name of Rolando Gonzalez Nunez, a major cocaine supplier who in the 1960s was one of the biggest coke dealers in New York, before fleeing to Venezuela because of legal problems. Frank gets in touch with Rolando and the deal is sealed. He buys his first kilo of cocaine for $20,000.
Damn, bitch.
The relationship quickly
That 20
developed
ball.
into a drug trafficking network. The Cuban drug trafficker regularly sent him large shipments of cocaine and heroin from South America, and Frank expanded his business by reselling the product in New York. And it didn't take him long to make his mark, becoming one of the city's biggest drug dealers in just 1 year.
Damn. In 1 year?
At the time, Venezuela was one of the Latin American countries where the Cosa Nostra was established. For drug traffickers, it was a strategic location, particularly thanks to its geographical proximity to the United States. An ideal base, which the French Connection used to transport its heroin to Latin America and distribute it to Miami, one of the main points of entry to the United States for drug trafficking. The Corsicans, with their ability to infiltrate and corrupt governments, were responsible for transporting the drugs to Venezuela. Then the Cubans would send the heroin to the United States before it was distributed throughout the country, including New York, where Frank, thanks to his collaboration with the French Connection and the Cubans, had become one of the city's biggest dealers. His network with the French Connection and the Cubans was paying off handsomely, although Frank knew he had to diversify. To do this, he set out to find new sources of supply and was prepared to do business with anyone as long as the product was pure enough.
Matthews was always willing to pay premium prices for multi-kilo shipments of pure heroin.
Damn.
If that was the best he could find.
In the end, Frank was just the opposite of La Cosa Nostra, who sold its drugs at exorbitant prices with no regard for the quality of the product. And
They just
so
sell
it wasn't
anything.
long before his network expanded even further, supplying drugs to nearly 21 different states, particularly on the east coast of the United States. It never reached California, but in time, it certainly could have taken over the whole country, as U.S. Federal Prosecutor William Callahan reports.
If Matthews' wings hadn't been clipped as they were in 1972, he would have eventually dominated the national
Federal
scene,
prosecutor.
and then he would have become a truly international kingdom.
Damn.
I think Matthews was so ambitious that could have been his ultimate goals.
Frank Matthews' profits from heroin and cocaine trafficking were staggering. It is said that he made up to $600,000 a day. His
Damn.
fortune was close to $300 million.
Damn.
Of $2 billion today.
Yeah, I'm doing the wrong thing in life. What they talking about?
Years. According to Liddy Jones,
In 1 year?
associate of Frank's, no gangster in New York at the time earned more money than him.
The Italian mafia made a lot of money. They couldn't touch Frank. He had more money than the mob.
Liddy Jones then recounts this anecdote from the early 70s.
I had a good friend who said she knew somebody in Brooklyn who could give me all the smack I needed. My friend was tight with an associate of Frank. I asked for 5 keys and got it for $22,000.
Damn.
I began making real good money from my connection to
This shit was
Like, I
back in
wasn't
the day.
anything special. All the top drug dealers along the East Coast were getting their dope from Frank. It was amazing to make a deal with him. He never really counted the money. You could have shorted him thousands of dollars, and Frank wouldn't have known.
Damn.
5 years after his arrival in New York, Frank Matthews had become
When you making money on like that, fuck
the
it.
city, even though he was barely in his 20s.
Damn.
Created his own drug trafficking network, completely independent of the mafia, which was quite a feat for an African-American gangster.
Yeah.
At the start of his criminal career, Frank Matthews was rather reserved in his lifestyle. He lived in a modest flat and didn't seem to do anything crazy, as Rick Talley, a former New York drug dealer who knew Frank in the late 60s, recalls.
In those days, Matthews did not really stick out in the crowd. And the way he was dressed, the way he talked, Frank looked and moved more like a country kid from North Carolina than a polished.
That's how you supposed to look.
However, as his drug empire grew, Frank began to take on a completely different role.
Nothing wrong with lavishing yourself up, getting a little bit better looking.
And drive around in luxurious cars.
But that's when they start looking at you.
Women. He also traded in his modest flat for a mansion in the wealthy Toad Hill district of New York, a neighborhood that, at the time, was known for housing some of the city's most notorious mobsters, including Big Paul Castellano, the future godfather of the Gambino family.
Hopefully I could be in that business
who
next.
had his home
What they talking
directly
about?
opposite Frank's mansion. There were also some members of the Lucchese family, and Frank was the only black man living there.
No black people lived there, and some of the most powerful mobsters were just a stone's throw away from Matthews' house. In the Matthews era, the only blacks you could see in Todd Hill were the hired help.
Damn.
Today, blacks comprise just the 1% of Todd
It's still like that, you know?
population.
Otherwise, Frank was a heavy.
All these crackers be taking all the goddamn money out.
Donald Goddard, an author who
They the main ones selling the drugs. These white people and these motherfucking
By the autumn of
Italians and fake
1972,
Jews.
Matthews showed the classic symptoms of chronic cocaine abuse, shuffling between extremes of euphoria and irritability. This helps explain Matthews' frequent irrational behavior in the way he handled drug deals.
William Callahan, the federal prosecutor who investigated the Matthew case, adds,
During the course of our investigation, we learned that he had a rapid, irregular heartbeat. So by abusing cocaine, Matthews was risking his health.
an addiction that didn't stop him from continuing to expand his empire and amass even more money.
It's amazing to see what he did as a self-made man and how he built a criminal empire on his own. I think the only people in organized crime history comparable to Matthews are Lucky Luciano and Pablo Escobar.
Damn.
Frank can indeed be compared to Luciano and Escobar, in the sense that, like them, he was the organizer and master of ceremonies of summits between kingpins. One in Atlanta in October 1971, during which he invited the country's biggest African-American and Hispanic drug traffickers with the aim of improving the distribution of heroin and cocaine. And the other in Las Vegas the following year.
He's smart.
During the fight between Muhammad Ali
He know
and Jerry
connection.
Gordy.
Make that
The
money
meeting
out move.
where similar topics were discussed, such as the need to establish stronger independent relations with the Corsican and Cuban mafia in order to free themselves from the control
God
of
working
the
mysterious
Italian
ways, you know?
mafia.
You never know when it's your time to come
Drug
up.
agent recounts,
When we began checking out the license plates and the intelligence on who was in attendance, we could see it was a meeting of the who's who of black organized crime. Matthews was the reason they came. At the time, he really was the country's biggest black kingpin.
it was then that the authorities began to take a closer interest in him.
Why? Fuck all your ass, nigga. Getting tired of your fucking ass. You popping up. Fucking up my video.
Las Vegas was a place where Frank Matthews often went. Like many drug dealers, he loved a city that had legalized gambling. Frank went there to gamble, to have a good time, but also to launder his money, as prosecutor William Callahan points out.
We heard Frank would take duffel bags full of cash to a casino and give them to a cashier. The casino would take 15 to 18% for laundering his money.
Damn.
The strange thing was that the authorities didn't even have him on their radar. Frank Matthews had illegally made his fortune and risen to the top of the underworld, and no one in the police force seemed to know about it.
In 1970, Matthews' name did not appear on any of the major criminal violators
Damn.
by the
Smart
authorities.
motherfucker.
He was a non-entity.
In fact, it wasn't until shortly after the Las Vegas summit in 1972 that the police finally started tapping his phone. It was the investigative group known as Group 12 that took a serious look at his case. Its aim? To find a way to indict drug baron Frank Matthews. The investigators included William Callahan, whose role was to coordinate the investigation, and Gerard Miller, a DEA agent with 20 years' experience.
Put their fucking faces up.
Group 12 had to gather all the evidence they could to prove that Matthews was involved in drug trafficking. Not an easy task, given that Frank's only criminal record was for stealing chickens. Besides, Gerard Miller couldn't understand how such an influential drug trafficker had managed to escape the vigilance of the police so far. And how could an African American in his 20s be involved in drug trafficking in almost 21 states of the country? It was a perplexing observation for the agents, including Miller, who said,
I hate to say it, but Frank was ahead of us from the beginning.
The investigation was therefore not easy to carry out, especially as Group 12 was under a great deal of pressure from its hierarchy to obtain results. And a lack of resources made available to carry out the investigation didn't help matters. The agents only had 3 months to produce something significant, which was very little, especially to nail a gangster of Matthews' caliber. In reality, it would have taken several years of investigation to achieve a convincing result. But Gerard Miller and his colleagues did their best with the resources at their disposal. It was thanks to them that Frank Matthews' telephone calls began to be tapped in 1972. The U.S. anti-drugs authorities then lent their support to the case, followed by Interpol and the U.S. Tax Service, with whom Group 12 was working closely to pursue the drug baron. Together, they succeeded in locating and seizing assets belonging to Frank, including several real estate properties. The investigators then tried to tail his car whenever they could, but Frank was faster than them and always escaped, breaking every possible rule of the road. Frank was probably under the influence of cocaine during these chases. Or did he know in advance that he was being watched? Corruption was widespread in the NYPD at the time. Either way, it wasn't worth continuing for Gerard Miller, who tells us,
It didn't really matter. We knew it was futile to follow him. He didn't seem to fear anything.
He once opened the boot of his car in broad daylight, took out kilos of drugs, and gave them to an individual in full view of everyone. As if Frank Matthews didn't give a damn about law enforcement surveillance. But it was only a matter of time before things turned in the investigators' favor.
Damn.
Early 70s, Frank Matthews' network continued to supply the United States with illegal substances and generate millions of dollars in revenue.
Making that bank, nigga.
Investigation progressed to the point where
shit, if he ain't gonna do it, the government gonna do it. Shit.
It began with the arrest
of
several of his associates. The arrests followed one another over time, with tongues occasionally being loosened, giving Group 12.
How we mad at the black man when the government doing it?
Their case.
The fuck,
years
nigga?
investigation, the authorities finally
they let it kiss the white man's ass.
To bring down Frank Matthews.
The black man does it, they try to kill us.
Was to arrest him. The arrest took place at 11 a.m. on January 5th, 1973. Frank was at Las Vegas International Airport with his girlfriend, flying to Los Angeles, when the authorities stopped him to handcuff him. Sometime later, they had obtained an arrest warrant for tax fraud and conspiracy to traffic drugs. Matthews had attempted, between April and September 72, to sell 18 kilograms of cocaine in Miami, with an estimated value of between $1 and $4.5 million.
Damn!
So, drug baron Frank Matthews was finally arrested. All that remained was to await his trial, scheduled for 7 months later. At the bail hearing, which took place the day after his arrest, Frank showed a certain arrogance towards William Callahan.
We were literally face to face. He told us that we had nothing on him and that he would be out in no time.
He seemed confident, but was soon disillusioned when he heard the amount of bail set by the magistrate. $5 million, the highest bail in the history of the United States at the time. This amount had been set because of Frank Matthews' high risk of absconding and his large fortune. Bail was subsequently reduced to $2.5 million, Frank having agreed not to oppose his extradition to New York. Then it was reduced again to $325,000, a ridiculous sum for a drug lord of Matthew's stature, who, unsurprisingly, jumped at the chance to regain his freedom.
Facts.
Yes, Frank Matthews was now free before the judgment, a mistake that the American justice system would come to bitterly regret, since the young gangster was not going to wait long to make his move.
But I don't want to come back, but they wouldn't be able to find my ass. Fuck they talking about? Tap my phone, all everything. Shit, facts, nigga. You ain't even find me, nigga. I don't know what the fuck they think this is, nigga. If I was making that much money, you ain't even find me. Fuck a little Drake, nigga. I'm gone. As soon as I get out, nigga.
At the head of his criminal
fuck all this shit, nigga. Fuck these niggas. I'm gone.
This made it difficult to keep an eye on him before the trial. Police Inspector Roger Garay testifies.
We couldn't keep tabs on Matthews. We were stretched thin and simply didn't have the manpower to watch him 24/7. All we could do was hope and pray he would keep showing up in court.
I mean, I think that should be your first priority, goofy asses.
Because in the end, there was nothing to stop Frank Matthews from taking his belongings and disappearing.
What? I'm gone!
It has to be said that he was facing a life sentence, and that in any case, the heroin market was increasingly unstable because of the gradual dismantling of the French Connection. So, based on this observation, there was nothing to stop him taking off. And that's precisely what happened.
I would have been gone.
1973, when the accused.
So they would let me go, nigga.
Showed up
I'm
for the trial.
gone.
That was to send him to prison. The drug baron had disappeared, declared fugitive the day after his trial. So, what had happened? Well, some sources claim that Frank bid farewell to friends and gave away part of his fortune before disappearing for good.
$20,000.
55-gallon drums filled with money.
Reggie Collins, a drug dealer at the time, says he was one of the last friends Frank saw before he disappeared.
It was 4 a.m. We were at Flaps on 119th Street. Frank said he was heading out of town and not coming back.
Facts.
I watched him drive off in a 1972 Ford Thunderbird. Black body, white top. Never saw him again.
Shit. You ain't seen me ever again, nigga.
Frank Matthews is said to have fled, but not alone, it seems, as his mistress, Cheryl Denise Brown, is also nowhere to be found.
Yeah, dig. What are you talking about?
At the same time
Give me a
Matthews,
bitch.
Which
I'm gone, nigga.
The two ran away together.
Get the money on.
The
Dip on
authorities
that ass.
also claim that Frank Matthews laundered up to $20 million to prepare his escape, most likely leaving the country. $20 million at the time is equivalent to more than $100 million.
I would have gone.
So, that's quite a lot of money. The DEA offered a $20,000 reward.
And imagine in another country. That's double that.
This was the
They could have been like $1 billion
offered for John
in the right country.
In 1931. The authorities put out thousands of wanted posters across the country, receiving numerous calls from people claiming to have seen the fugitive. Unfortunately, these leads went nowhere. But the hunt for Frank Matthews intensified, and the DEA searched the world for him, having no doubt that they would capture him one day. Glenn Chisholm, one of the investigators involved in the search, recounts,
"It was the biggest manhunt in DEA history, so I was excited to be a part of the team.
Yo,
But it was
goofy ass up.
frustrating as well. It looked as if we had mountains of evidence, but as we moved forward, the leads seemed to vanish into thin air."
However, we have learned that thanks to Interpol, which is collaborating with the U.S. authorities on the case, Frank Matthews has been seen in Rome, Amsterdam, and other European cities. Perhaps Frank Matthews was in Europe? If the reports on him are to be believed, it's entirely possible. But it was also likely that he was in Africa, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Venezuela, Philadelphia.
You ain't gonna never see me ever again.
North Carolina, or maybe.
Oh, he got a face transplant, new body design. Nigga, I've been gone.
The problem is that there's hardly any useful information in the files or any real leads to locate him. There are, however, some locations that are more plausible than others, like the Bahamas, a place where the fugitive owned property.
Okay.
Known at the time to be home to the largest number of fugitive criminals, or Algeria, the ideal country for a fugitive in the 1970s, given that relations between Algeria and the United States were not very good at the time, and there was no extradition treaty between the two nations. The investigators therefore hoped that he was not there, because it would have been, shall we say, virtually impossible to capture him. The investigation group in charge of finding Matthews received hundreds of leads from all over the world.
$20,000, not that much.
Could be anywhere and
Crip,
nowhere
nigga.
at the same time. Getting information
You risking your whole life for
was also
that's a social security number.
as Glenn Chisholm reports.
During the entire time I was involved with the investigation, I never interviewed
I
anybody
wonder if he's still
who
alive.
actually knew anything about Frank's whereabouts.
He'd at least be about like almost
They would say
80.
invariably that if they knew where Frank was, they would not tell us because Frank was generous with his money.
Strangely, no one seemed willing to give any information about Frank Matthews. The investigators therefore interviewed other people, such as Barbara Hinton, Matthews' former wife, with whom he had 3 children.
We interviewed Barbara at her liquor store. The store was sparsely stocked, and it didn't look to be a moneymaker. Barbara struck me as being bitter. I don't know if she was that way personally, or if she was upset.
Hey, bitch, you gotta stay behind with your
In any
goofy
case,
ass.
we believe she didn't do anything.
Al Parrish, Glenn Chisholm's colleague on the Frank Matthews case, also gives us his impressions.
You only got a chance for one bitch. You gotta pick the baddest bitch who got the smartest mindset. Cause
What kind of man leaves his kids and doesn't show up again?
shit,
Surely, if he was alive,
shit, a real nigga. Fuck you talking about?
Barbara for the sake of the kids.
Fuck no.
I just didn't get it.
Hell no. Them hoes candy cats, ball and chain. Nigga, I would have dipped them all them dipset.
Investigators
Nigga,
Glenn Chisholm and Al Parrish
got me a brand new bitch and disappeared.
were quite
Fuck the kid head out of this shit. Nigga, we finna go.
The
Nigga,
group 12
Crip.
that had charged Matthews.
Create a new kid.
Because according to them, Miller had done a poor job of thinking he knew everything about Frank.
Thought who would leave their kids behind?
There was very
Shit.
little to go on. What's more, on examining the files,
On a chance of
investigators
freedom?
noticed that at
Come
one
on.
point, Frank Matthews had been prepared to cooperate with the authorities on condition that he left some of his men alone. An offer Miller allegedly refused, which made no sense.
That was stupid. We already had them on the wiretaps. On top of that,
Why would he
somebody
snitch?
spooked Matthews by telling him he was going to get life. You'd never say that. Matthews must have felt as if he had no choice but to run.
In any case, the investigators continued their work, which then brings us to January 28th, 1974, the day Glenn Chisholm and Al Parrish
I would left the kids behind, the wife behind,
to watch the second fight between Muhammad
got a brand new
Ali
bitch and
Joe Frazier.
moved and never come back.
The aim was to catch Frank Matthews, a diehard Muhammad Ali fan. The 2 investigators had been informed that Frank had undergone cosmetic surgery.
Told you,
to hide his
nigga.
features and thus go incognito.
Did I just say that? Oh, got a whole new face, nigga, and a body.
I was going to an Ali Frazier fight and catch
I just told y'all niggas that.
The experience was really
Yeah, I'm a
something
smart
for
nigga,
young
man.
agent like me.
That day, at least 20,000 people
Oh, we got a whole new face, a whole new body,
Agents arrived
new
early to
name.
observe
Nigga,
the
you
crowd,
ain't know who the fuck
tried
I
to take
am, nigga.
photos, but nothing, not a single sign of Frank Matthews. It was another failure.
You ain't gonna be able to find my goofy ass. Nigga got a new face, new body, new personality, nigga new brain, nigga
A year
new
goes
life,
by, and
new
the
kids, new
investigation
wife,
group,
nigga,
which
nothing's the
includes Glenn
same.
Chisholm and Al Parrish has not made one
You ain't know who
iota
the fuck
of
I am no
progress.
more.
It turns out that the investigators
I would left the other people behind, said fuck it, and just dip, nigga, dipset.
examining the slightest
Crip.
piece of evidence, traveling across
If
the
they don't
United
benefit,
States
you know what I'm
and
saying, as
abroad
far as
to follow up
winning
potential
and
leads,
surviving.
and in the end had achieved very little. In the end, they knew as much about Matthews' disappearance as they did at the start, a status quo that prompted the DEA to disband the investigation group.
We felt like we had wasted our time and had gotten nowhere. The DEA didn't have its act together.
The investigation was then handed over to the U.S. Marshals, who took up the case from scratch, given the paucity of information on the fugitive. But here, too, as time went on, leads became increasingly scarce. The DEA, which had kept the Matthews file open and continued the search, then saw a new generation of agents arrive in the following decades, who certainly knew Frank but had other things to worry about. This was a time when major drug traffickers in Colombia and Mexico were monopolizing all the attention of the American authorities, and the Frank Matthews case was no longer the DEA's priority. So, the U.S. Marshals took over the case and tried to locate him themselves, but it was always the same scenario. Mike Pizzi, a member of the U.S. Marshals who oversaw the investigation against Frank Matthews, recalls,
"We spent countless hours pursuing and harassing everyone we thought knew Matthews or who had contact with him. Some people were hassled to the point that they found it necessary to change their locations. Others got used to seeing us on a regular basis, and they didn't like it."
A frontal strategy, but one that had its limits, as Dave O'Flaherty, also a member of the U.S. Marshals, points out.
"We didn't shake up anything. We asked someone, 'Did you see Frank?' They'd try to play us. They'd say, 'Got some money, brother? I'll tell you.' We concluded that nobody we talked to knew anything, and that Frank Matthews was no longer in New York City."
The U.S. Marshals continued to search, then took a closer look at the 3 sons Frank had left behind. That's when they learned that one of them was in prison for stealing cars. This was surprising, as Frank was known to be a good father. But to go from a caring father to a heartless one was strange.
Easily.
The suspicion shared by Mike Pizzi, who states,
"It's either freedom or a ball and chain, nigga.
Matthews had
Picking
$20
freedom."
million when he left, and he was still alive. What was his son doing, stealing cars? I didn't feel that Frank had reached out to his family since he disappeared.
Never been gone. Never reached back out to him and just disappeared, nigga. Crip.
Those closest to him
Started all back over.
Effective escape? If so, it was surprising. What if, after all, Frank Matthews was dead? Of course, no fingerprints or traces of his body have been found, but there are theories that point in that direction. Many people interviewed by the investigators have said that Frank Matthews is no longer with us. Deborah Nightwine, a member of the U.S. Marshal Service, seems to share this opinion.
The Matthews investigation was the most frustrating case I ever worked. I literally worked the case 24/7. I followed through on every lead. By the end of the assignment, I began thinking that maybe the reason I didn't find anything solid was because Frank Matthews was dead.
Mike Pizzi also believes in this hypothesis.
Being the ultimate optimist, I originally believed we could find and arrest him. My deputies and I worked many cases where the investigation took us far and wide. Usually we had a piece of information or a lead that was solid. Even in cases where
Frank Matthews
was
go
1 month ahead of us, or a state or county away from the last sighting, or the last verifiable piece of information. But I don't recall a case from the past 40 or more years that involves a fugitive fleeing with a young girlfriend, and both of them disappeared.
Nigga, I would have been gone, nigga. He a smart man.
Frank Matthews
I would left the kid behind,
what happened to him?
the other wife behind, the family behind, all the friends, everybody. Got me a new bitch and started all back over again, nigga. Fuck they talking about?
That the mob had him whacked because he knew too much about their operations, and also because if he really had $20 million cash, as the legend says, the mob wanted that money for sure. Plus, Frank's organization was in shambles, and he was on the run from the feds. Whether arrested, indicted, or in jail, Frank didn't have the justice he once had, so it was easier for the mob to move on him. I believe that is what happened. Frank is sleeping with the fishes somewhere.
A plausible theory, in the sense that Frank didn't like the Mafia, and the Mafia didn't like him either.
Because they work for the government.
First of all,
they work with the fake Jews. That's the government.
Didn't like Frank coming to Toad Hill, as Gerard Miller explains.
We know the mob was really upset with Frank's presence in Todd Hill. We learned that the mob sent a delegation to see Frank and tell him he was out of his league. La Cosa Nostra, in fact, was so upset that Group 12 even started to receive anonymous intelligence from sources living across the street from the Matthews family. They were telling us about what was happening.
So why y'all didn't arrest none of these motherfuckers then?
The mobster Paul Castellano even wanted to eliminate Frank, according to the police, who overheard him on a telephone tap. A death threat.
So why they didn't arrest these motherfuckers, but they only arrest the black guy? They were working for the government.
There was the time Frank Matthews kidnapped an associate of the Genovese family, in revenge for another of the family's associates ripping him off in a drugs deal. A totally insane act that could have led the Mafia to eliminate him too. So, Frank Matthews eliminated by the Mafia? Yes, it's quite likely. But it's also possible that he died of a cocaine overdose, since it was known that he had a strong addiction to the drug, and that he had heart problems. Or we could believe this other theory of assassination, a theory involving Matthews, the CIA, the Corsicans, and Venezuela. Because at the time, Frank is said to have scuppered the Corsicans' drug trafficking network in Venezuela. The Group 12, which was investigating Frank at the time, had recovered telephone taps in which Frank was heard revealing information about this connection, which subsequently enabled the authorities to dismantle the network. This incident is said to have infuriated the Corsicans, who pointed the finger at Matthews and named him as the main culprit behind the huge loss of money. The fact that the Corsicans had to change their supply route to Miami may therefore have prompted them to want to eliminate Frank, as did the CIA, which had interests in the region.
While we have no way of knowing what the CIA thought about the Venezuelan bust, they must have been furious with Matthews as well, because the agency was very active in Venezuela. So in my view, the Venezuelan bust probably screwed up, or at least interfered with their plans.
So we have the Corsican Mafia on one side and the CIA on the other, both of whom had something against Frank. Two big entities that would have had no trouble making him disappear without a trace.
I began to change my opinion about Matthews after learning about his connections to the Corsicans and the CIA, and to Rolando Gonzalez and Venezuela. Put all that together and put $10 or $20 million in cash in Matthews' hands, and I could see him headed for a hole in the ground without his money, and with Brown right next to him. Matthews was no longer an asset, and as a fugitive, he was a liability.
So, was Frank Matthews murdered? Unfortunately, we can only speculate on this possibility. These and other rumors only add to the Frank Matthews mystery. Some think he's
But with a dip, y'all would never see me again. Got a whole new life, whole new family, whole new face, whole new body build. Nigga, I would have gone.
What's certain is that
As soon as they would have released me from prison, I got $50 million, $20 million. Boy, come on.
The story of a drug lord who overnight disappeared from the face of the earth without a trace. What happened to Frank Matthews after his disappearance? It's a question that I fear will remain
He probably living where Tupac living.
unanswered.
Damn! In 2024? Cause I said he'll be about 80. Let the man rest. Damn! I told you he'd be like about 80 now.
Let's tell this, his body never turned up. Cheryl Brown's body never turned up. No bones were ever located.
They still looking for a nigga and the case is still open.
Cold case homicide cases.
They want that money on. That's what they want.
He's covered his path very well.
He a smart nigga. He said, fuck Lil Durk.
What do you think? Is Frank Matthews still alive?
Most definitely.
I'd be interested to hear what you think.
Him or his family members who know what's up.
The video to the end. If you liked it, please feel free to like and share it.
Shout out to Life of a Gangster.
Hope to meet you again as quickly as possible. See you soon, and take care.
Alright, back. So y'all see from that bitch, man, it's just like Frank Matthews a smart motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? From coming from North Carolina, he went to Philadelphia, then New York. He found his way with the mob. And then, you know, the mob was connected to the fake Jews. And we all know the fake Jews are the government. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, it's real funny. It's like, okay, so y'all didn't get y'all try to take out Frank Matthews, but why y'all try to take out the mob? Why y'all try to take out the fake Jews? Why y'all do none of that shit? But Frank Matthews was they number one target because he's moving the most weight. Come on, man. You know what I'm saying? It just goes to show you, man. It's like, if you ain't part of that system and you are an anomaly and you making millions upon millions upon millions, they gonna try everything in their power to try to take what you got. You know what I'm saying? And Frank Matthews, like he knew from the head start, I'm gonna have to leave some family behind. I'm gonna have to leave some kids behind. I'm gonna have to leave my whole life behind. Start all back over and leave. You know what I'm saying? Lil Durk tried to do the same damn thing. But Lil Durk waited too damn long. Frank Matthews smart as fuck. He said, nigga, they give me the fucking chance to get out this bitch. I'm gone. Nigga ain't gonna never see me ever fuck again. Nigga, I'm gonna disappear on y'all fuck asses. And that's what he did, man. Hey, one of the biggest drug lords to ever do it. And he left away with almost He left away with 100 million, basically, because it said they sell 20 million, but in this type of time, that'd be 100 million. You know what I'm saying? Nigga came up, nigga. In some countries, nigga, you go to that with 20 million, nigga, you a billionaire. You get what I'm saying? Like, bruh, like, that's why I'm trying to tell people, man, you can get that bag and dip on these motherfuckers, man. And, you know, his family, I don't know, they didn't really say nothing about his family. Cause you know what I'm saying, they said his mom died, his dad, I don't know if he was really in his life. He went with his auntie. His auntie said something about him, but you know, hey, you know, like I said, man, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do in life, cause they don't want to see us win in the first place. If you try to go around the world and try to do what they try to tell us to do and go to break that little rat system, nigga, you'll be a slave for life to this shit. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you might as well take your chances and try to dipset with that motherfucker, because at the end of the day, man, you know what I'm saying? Look what these billionaires, these white billionaires and all these government does. Look what they do when they go to different countries. All they do is step on niggas' necks. They step on people's necks and take what they can get and use that and try to sell it over here for an arm and a leg. That's what they be doing. So it's like, if we try to make our way and try to do some shit, so we can come up the fuck, nigga, like, why don't that make sense to me? We might as well try to get a piece of the pie. They doing it. They killing everybody. They taking everybody land, everybody oil, everybody drugs. They sell their own shit. You know what I'm saying? So we just trying to make it where we get in where we fit in. But this was a good video, man. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Shout out to Frank Matthews, man. He's a smart man. Got him a bad bitch and dipped on these fuck niggas. So we out this bitch. Hood, Northside, Big Crip, and the gang Northside shit.
Hey, Dad, you know, dog, when we link up, dog, this shit be legendary. Even though this is instrumental, you the engineer on it, so Kodak everywhere.